Hello there. Welcome to Queer Armor. This month we've got a special Q&A. Questions were submitted by my Patreon. If you want to get your question answered the next time we have one of these Q&As, come join us over on Patreon. You'll also get access to all of the videos just a little bit faster. That is not coffee. Couple questions that have come in. First up, this isn't really a question, it's just the words firearms maintenance. And since you wanted it in so quick you couldn't even answer, put it in the form of a question, I'm going to give you very quick details. The big thing is, if it's metal and it slides against metal, put some oil on it. AR bolts, soak it in a bowl of CLP. Same thing with most barrels. Wipe things down afterwards. Make sure for striker-fired guns you aren't soaking the slide. Honestly, just making sure you have a thin layer of oil on things. It's rare that over-oiling is the problem nowadays. It can happen still, especially with striker-fired pistols, but more often than not cleaning enough is your issue. What are your thoughts on pistol caliber carbines and short-barreled rifles? Range toys? Or actual useful tools depending on the situation. Short barrel rifles, first of all, are not range toys. An 11-inch AR would arguably be the most robust and capable shooting option, or at least one of them, in terms of capability from 25 meters out to 250 meters. Like, it has a fair amount of capability. SBRs get annoying legally, entirely because going across state lines with one requires specific individual permission from the federal government. But there's absolutely use cases for having guns that are short. I think there's a lot of those. PCCs, the second part of your question, pistol caliber carbines, that's a bit of a more complex answer. There are three categories of weapons. There's the weapon that works perfectly, there's the weapon that works well enough for what I need it to do, and then there's everything else. And I think with PCCs, you often find people are finding other pieces of utility with them, rather than inherently finding them a more ethical weapon just for the fight itself. You are your own supply line, for one. So the idea of having a pistol and a pistol carbine share the same magazines, give you one gives you a weapon with a point of contact on a third point of contact on your shoulder, and gives you the ability to really control it out to 100, 150, 200 meters if you're really skilled. While a 9mm pistol gives you a lot of flexible options in terms of discretion. Realistically, being accurate out to 50 meters is a skill that you need to develop. Being accurate out to 100 meters is a very, very high bar that I think your average person is going to take a couple of years to really get up to. While 100 meters of accuracy with a PCC is something I could get most people to do in an afternoon. I would also say overpenetration is a complicated question. It's not as simple as a lot of people think it is, because 5.56 often has very light bullets. So the amount of secondary capability varies depending on what you're shooting at, depends on where you're shooting, depends on what surfaces you're considering. I'm not sure I could sit here and honestly say a PCC, a pistol caliber carbine, would be better than a short-barreled rifle in a intermediate cartridge for a lot of over-penetration purposes. But I could absolutely see, especially if you're talking about Rattlers, for example, the 6.5-inch version of the 300 Blackout Rattler, one, even with that, is still relatively large, even when folded up to its most compact. And then on top of that, there's been a lot of instances of those just flat falling apart because there is so much gas and pressure going on outside of the gun that it is really hard to accommodate for how much that gun beats itself apart. I think a lot of smaller stuff, pistol calibers will end up even for a little while, you'll get more reliability in smaller form factors out of something that isn't throwing as much gas out of the gun. What's the cheapest commercially available rifle or PCC you would consider good enough to be a reliable option for a person living in a place where, quote, semi-auto with detachable magazines is not an option? I would argue, kind of like with the bug-out bag question, it is an interesting question, but you were asking the wrong one, or at bare minimum, you were asking a question that is reflective of a failure of something that should have happened earlier. The very idea that a removable magazine wouldn't be a thing in your state means the first thing you should do is fix your state. That's insane. Before I get into an actual answer for you, first thing you should do is either move to a state where it's not a problem or fight to change your state's laws to make it fine. Okay, my second answer is going to be kind of complicated. Because if you're talking about states that have bans on removable magazines, you're talking about states that will have their own unique ban. So, first of all, I am not a lawyer. Let's put that in big fucking letters, because I am not a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I am some idiot on the internet. That said, look, cops are trained, asterisk, kind of, sort of, ish. How well they'll be trained on the ins and outs of your individual and local gun law will vary wildly. And whether or not you get arrested or whether or not you get charged are going to be different things. Even if you have a legal weapon, the chance of a cop arresting you over it, or possibly worse because they think you have an illegal weapon, unfortunately makes a lot of pump options and lever options only make sense in your state. Being able to look an officer dead in the eye and go, that law doesn't apply, this is a pump gun, is absolutely a great way of short-circuiting the is that gun legal question. Being able to just say that law does not apply to this firearm works perfectly. That said, if I had to pick a single gun to point to and be like, if you're in a state like this, what would I recommend? I'd still recommend an AR. I would say the smartest option, the most reliable option is still going to be getting an AR. The only thing you're going to need to do, Cross Armory sells a $26 conversion kit, basically. It turns your AR into a fixed magazine AR. It makes it so that if you want to load in more ammo, you either need to break the gun open or there's I think there's a special attachment, but I'm not sure. I've seen the feed devices. I don't know if they go into a standard AR upper or if they're expecting you to modify the upper as well. But even still, if you're talking about a home defense weapon, something where you just affix the magazine is still going to be more reliable than trying to pick like an SKS or something esoteric that has like a fixed mag, which also leads into the next question rather perfectly. If you had to go into combat with an esoteric weapon, what would you choose? Nothing that's been fielded as a duty weapon for a modern post-Korean War military. And it's that last specific description that kind of fucks me on my answers for this. Because on the one hand, I'd love to sit here and be like, okay, so end of the Korean War. Okay, well, let's go with an M1 Garand. Or M1 Garand, rather. Yeah, those were used in the Philippines up until 1990. Not fielded becomes a far more complicated question because you have a lot of militaries where the answer to what do we do with our rifle now that it is no longer our mainline rifle is sell it to another nation. And because of that, even stuff that was valid that was like falling out of favor in the 40s and 50s is still going to be used as a military weapon by a second-tier military up until the 50s and 60s for a lot of these. The SKS were issued up until the 80s. Yeah, technically the Russians stopped using them pretty much at 1955, but they were still being issued to backline troops, they were still being issued to militias, and they were still being given to other militaries. The SVT-40? Developed and abandoned in 1958 as the Finns abandoned it in 1958. but you have a lot of Russian units that abandoned them and kept using them as a mainline rifle up until the fucking 80s. There's so many options that I'd be like, oh, I want to use that, but a lot of them just don't fit that. There's a couple that, as distasteful as it might be, my initial reaction was, well, the Nazi guns weren't really adopted, and you'd get both the FG-42 and the Sturmgewehr 44 as options. Both of those, the FG-42 is an 8mm Mauser with a 20-round magazine, and it came with a telescopic sight. The magazine would be on the side. It would be kind of weird in terms of its balancing, but 8mm Mauser is not to be sneezed at. That's a decent round. And it has a telescopic sight. You have some options there. The Sturmgewehr 44, on the other end, is kind of a prototype AK-47. That's going to get a bunch of people pissed off writing in the comments, because the AK-47 is essentially take like 7 designs of the time and then add in a bunch of unique elements and combine them together. It is not just Sturmgewehr modified, but you can look at the Sturmgewehr and you can at least see like a prototype assault rifle. You look at that and go, yeah, that's what an assault rifle should look like. So it would give you a lot of the core concepts of it. But both of those, one, I have to go to war with a Nazi gun, which we've talked about this before on the channel, that like a weapon that works for another group can be reapplied. It doesn't take the ideology of the group that it was developed for. Doesn't change the fact that it's going to be my weapon in a fucking war, and I'm going to be thinking about it and dealing with it for a while. And especially, finding parts for either of those is going to be basically impossible. The designs, not at all similar to anything currently being fielded. Even if they kind of overarching look similar, every single part is a unique on that. And more importantly, you're just not going to find any of them. Even if it's rare, there's some stuff you can point to and be like, well, there were a few years of it being somewhere. Speaking of, the runner-up would be the 1941 Johnson. It was essentially the same level of capability as an M1 Garand, arguably a bit more because it has a 10-round internally fed magazine instead of a 8-round internally fed magazine. Same 30-06 chambering, same semi-automatic functionality. It would be kind of terrible in terms of trying to adapt optics to it, in terms of trying to modernize it, but if you're talking about grabbing a gun and just fucking going with it as it sits, the 41 would at least give you 30-06 you'd be able to find. I live in the US, I'll be able to find that in pretty much every hunting store. And nothing about it is so weird that I wouldn't be able to figure out ways to make most of it adaptable and workable. Even the 5-round, the clips that it's fed by, stamped steel that if I really needed to, you could like hammer out a couple backup clips for yourself in like a decent shop. My actual answer, I think there is only one real answer for this. The EM2. It didn't fall out of favor because it was bad. In fact, it introduced an idea that the Americans spent 50 years trying to pretend wasn't viable until they finally had to admit that was the correct answer, but they came up with it with a different solution anyway. The EM2 fired 270 British, which was an intermediate cartridge. It was a bullpup that was designed with relatively modern optic options. Specifically, it was implemented by the British military only for a handful of years. And then, importantly, as soon as NATO standardized on the final round, it was decided the EM2 wouldn't be able to be rechambered for that, and so they just bought FALs. That said, prior to 1953, there was 2.5 years of the British Empire fielding the EM2, a bullpup with relatively modern optic options, with a very small, reliable configuration, and using a chambering that isn't far off from some rounds that are swinging back to the concept. 270 British is not that far off from some of the 270 cartridges that you can buy in the US right now. You wouldn't find anything that would directly fit the cases, or I wouldn't directly replace the cases, don't get me wrong, but they sell 270 bullets. You'd be able to at least find pieces of the supplies. It used modern gunpowder, and there's modern loading data available. That would be on my short list. The EM2 is probably the best option there, entirely because it wasn't discarded because it failed. It wasn't discarded because it was a bad idea. It was only discarded because America wanted to push NATO in a different direction, and the English kind of just went along with it. And because of that, it was only fielded for a few years, just slotting in perfectly for the timeline for pre-1953. So I think that is the sweet spot right there. It gets you a relatively modern gun with a telescopic sight or a coleometer, what you might know more as a red dot option, integrated into the guns. Like, these have what we would consider modern functionality, borderline of the fucking 50s. Like, no modularity, no ability to add a modern light, don't get me wrong, and it is using a proprietary old optic system. But it gave you optic options, it gave you magazine options. Everything in the esoteric choices are going to be some scale of bad. I feel like the EM2 is going to be the least shitty of all of the shit options. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If you want to get your question answered next time, definitely join us over on Patreon. I cannot thank my Patreon supporters enough. The only reason I get to keep doing this stuff is because I have supporters on Patreon. And if we can get enough support built up, I would love to start putting out weekly videos. So if you want to make that a reality and you want to see that happen in the future, come join us over on Patreon. That's going to be it for me. Stay dangerous, y'all. Keep each other safe. And remember, moral doesn't mean legal, and Stonewall was a fucking riot. Peace.